All right. So in the interest of time, it is after 6:30 now, so I do want to get started. I'm Kristen. I am the one who sends out all the stuff for ADHDKC, and I've been, along with Jeremy Didier, who's not here tonight, kind of co-leading this since 2012, but I know a lot of people haven't known about us. So I want everyone to be welcome to tonight's presentation. I am super excited to introduce Becky Bowe from Fit Learning, which is a tutoring center in Kansas City that applies the science of learning to teach core foundational skills to learners of all ages and abilities. Becky has an extensive background as a behavioral analyst and has worked with a variety of neurodiverse children. And if you caught the ADHDKC Conversations podcast with her, you saw how passionate she is to empower families and educators with evidence-based practices that enhance the quality of life and learning outcomes of their children and students. And so with that, I'm sure we'll hear some great tips tonight. But before I turn it over to Becky, just a little housekeeping here. Again, ADHDKC is a CHAD chapter in the Kansas City area. We welcome people from anywhere to join us. As long as you have internet, you can join. We do have a free giveaway that we are going to be working on. Anyone who attends a meeting in May or June and sends in the chat box your name and email address, you will be entered to win a free 1-year CHAD subscription. We're doing individual subscriptions, so it's a $75 value, and all you have to do is put your name in the chat with your email address so we know that you're here, and then we'll have a nice raffle, and there's more than one to win. So we'll be giving several of these away. As a CHAD chapter, we are not able to endorse any of the products, services, publications, medications, or treatments, but we provide this as a service so that you all can learn along with us about the upcoming stuff. So again, Chad is going to be hosting one of the 3 hosts of the International Conference on ADHD. It's coming to Kansas City in November. I have only been to one of these in the past. It was in St. Louis, I don't know, 2018, 2019, something like that. Huge. And sometimes it was hard to pick which topic I wanted to go watch because they had multiple sessions going on in the same time across the convention center. So this is going to be a huge thing in November, and CHAD members get a discount. So it's not a free conference, but it's amazing, and it will have speakers from everywhere. So November 13th to 15th, get it on your calendar. I've already requested the week off. I will be there, and I hope that any of you can join. So again, enter to win the CHAD membership so you get the discount. Shown here also are the upcoming events that ADHDKC is sponsoring. And if you just go to our events page on ADHDKC.org, you can sign up for any of these. The adults group and women's group are both in person, but the parent group, the community and connect, and the teen group are all online. With that, I am going to stop my screen share and let Becky take it over.
Perfect. Thank you for that introduction. I'm going to try to present in full screen. Let's see if this does what I want it to. Okay, I think I'm set. As Kristen said, yes, I am Becky Bowe. I am the clinical director and owner of Fit Learning KC. We have been in Kansas City for about 7 years. We are a fluency-based academic services company, and we use a lot of the strategies that I'm going to talk about this evening in our programming and support for the learners that we serve. I'm going to organize things on my screen a little bit better. There we go. Okay. So tonight my objective is to, I hope that you can each leave with strategies that will make your life a little bit easier and your child's world a little bit more manageable. I am assuming that there are parents of children of all ages in the group listening this evening. I'm going to do my best to give suggestions and recommendations that can span various age ranges. I know it can be pretty frustrating to sit through something and only hear about recommendations for little tiny kids. Our big kids need support as well. And so hopefully these are tools and resources that are easily adaptable or that apply across the board for various ages. And then we'll be spending the evening talking about independence and scaffolding executive function skills for our learners. I think a lot of times we think about executive functioning as you either have it or you don't, or it's a personality trait, or it's a characteristic that one person may possess and another may not. And for our kids, especially with ADHD, it can be I think a lot of people assume that they just don't have executive functioning, but actually executive functioning isn't a thing that you have or you don't have. It's a complete packaged skill set of tasks and the strategies and skills that can be learned over time. So the good news there is that there's skills and strategies that are learnable and that can increase across the years. Oh, you know what I don't know how to do? There we go. This is my first time presenting from Canva, and so wasn't quite certain how to change my slides, but got that figured out. When we're talking about executive functioning and why it matters or what makes it important, executive functioning is like the air traffic control system of the brain. So it's the part that keeps everything organized and structured and in logical and meaningful order so that all the outward behaviors that we engage in that keep our day moving forward happen when they're supposed to. They can happen when parts of our days change or when we get distracted. That air traffic control system can still capture all the parts that are needed to execute the predictable routine parts of our day. So when a kid is diagnosed with ADHD, it's not that they don't know what to do. They often know what to do and they often know what the expectations are, but they're not certain how to get themselves and their environment organized to execute the various tasks that are required to be completed at the right time and in the right way. If you think about the flow of getting through your day, you have predictable systems and routines that work that you've built up over time. You have an alarm clock that goes off that cues you to get out of bed and start your day. You likely have a pretty predictable morning routine that follows some semblance of sequential order from one day to the next. It doesn't vary a whole lot from one day to the next. There are predictable things that you complete before you go to work each day. And things like that. You're able to plan, you're able to prioritize your day, you're able to start tasks when the previous task ends or when an external system cues you to start that task. You're aware of the amount of time that it takes to complete a task. So you know if you're ahead of schedule or falling behind schedule, you know if you need to rush or if you have a little bit of downtime to calm down or think about whatever happens next. And you know where things are that are needed for that part of the routine because you're organized and structured and you do the same thing each day. Those systems for adults have built up over time. If you think about when you move to a new house, you kind of have to restructure what your routines and your systems look like because maybe your keys don't go in the same place anymore, or maybe your shoes have a new home because of the new environment that you're in. I think a lot of times parents expect that kids of all ages will adapt to our routines and to our systems and structures. And we're the ones that planned those for ourselves to be successful and supportive the way we need it to be. And a lot of times kids don't just pick up on that, especially our kids with ADHD. They don't clue into the cues that we clue into, or they don't recognize the signals and the systems that are in place that indicate that this is the thing that happens next in that structure. And even when we do put supports in there for them, when we're giving laundry lists of instructions that need to be done, so we're saying, go put on your shoes, grab your backpack and get in the car. For a kid with ADHD, they're going to have a really hard time putting those 3 steps, especially a younger kid, putting those 3 steps in order, remembering from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 how to execute all the little pieces that go into completing those tasks. And so it's often not enough just to repeat the instruction over and over again and expect different or better performance as time goes on. For an older child, that could look like staring at a blank homework planner and not knowing what to get started with or how to get started with completing homework after school. Or maybe it's an overwhelming homework planner that's got 7 assignments and all of them are due yesterday. So how do I prioritize and where do I even begin to plan how much time do I need to get each of these tasks finished? And so we're going to work through a 3-step system I already don't remember how I got to the next slide. How did I do that? There we go. Okay, it's up and down arrows. Perfect. I'm going to say that to myself a couple times so that next time I know that it's up and down arrows. Otherwise, I'm going to keep trying the thing that I've tried in the past. So as we move through this evening, we're going to talk about this three-step support cycle of structure, support, and fade. So anytime we encounter kind of a pain point in the day, and easy ones to talk about are the morning routine, the after school routine, the go to bed routine, the homework routine, but there's also non-daily routines. So maybe there's going to the doctor routine, or there's going to baseball practice tonight where I don't do that every single night or whatever. Any of these, this three-step system is adaptable to any type of routine that has some structure and some flexibility. So the first step, we're looking at structure, meaning that we are putting tools and resources into the environment for our kids to rely on to reduce pain points in that structure or in that routine. And some examples of that are things like checklists, launch pads, and timers. And then when we talk about the supporting part of this three-step cycle, that's the help that we provide in the moment without taking over. And so that can be prompting, that can be modeling using the structures that are in place. It can be modeling completion of the task or the routine. It can be completing the task next to your child so that they can see you executing the same routine that you are, or that they're being expected to complete. And then over time, the fade part of this looks like stepping away. We're not pulling structure away, we're pulling support away over time. So as skills build and as our kids are better focused or better able to use the structures that we've put in for them, we remove ourselves from that routine or that task, not the supports or not the structures. It's never the goal to get rid of the structures that we've put in place. It's the goal to teach them how to use the structures the way that's most effective for them. And that can look at reducing reminders and allowing autonomy within a routine. So, and one way to think about that, you wouldn't expect a kid to ride a bike without training wheels the first time, and executive function is the same thing. You don't want a kid to ride a bike with training wheels forever and ever and ever and ever, and it's okay if they do. So we want to be able to fade that support. So the training wheels in that case are a support that we want to fade over time. And then it's really important to keep in mind that especially in initial early steps of this, when you're first building structures and teaching your kids how to rely on these structures, not every day is going to require the same level of support. So some days you may lean into fading your support a little more heavily than others. And really, the calmer the environment is, the less support you may need to provide for that particular routine or task that you're completing with your kiddo. And you may find yourself in a situation, we're coming up on the end of the school year, where routines and systems in the house are going to change because the school days change, or they're going to summer school at a different school instead of their home school. They're not going to summer school, they're going to summer camp, so they get to sleep later, whatever. Any of those parts of the predictable routines and days that change could mean that you need to provide more support, and that you have to ramp up the level of support instead of fade the level of support. And that's okay. A lot of that could just mean that today's brain needs more support than yesterday's brain or tomorrow's brain. We all have days like that. So this isn't a linear A to B process. It's a kind of all over process with you. There's not one way to fade or to reduce support the right way. You're doing it the way that is most beneficial for you and your child. So ADHD brains struggle with mental holding. So one of the first steps or supports that we can, or structures that we can provide to our kiddos, is to make everything visible. If it's visible, it's harder to ignore. But on the flip side of that, it's also true that eventually something that's visible in the environment just kind of fades away into the environment. And so you may need to change the location of your structures or supports or your structures over time. You may need to just make the structure new. If you have a morning routine checklist that's on the bedroom door, you may need to put it on a different piece of paper after it's been there for some time, or you may need to move it from the door to the wall so that it becomes salient again. Otherwise, it kind of just fades into the background and it just becomes another thing on the wall. You can use things like clipboards and dry erase markers. You can print visuals for something that's very predictable, that's not going to change. You can use a picture schedule or a picture checklist. If it's something that you need to, that may change from morning to morning or from afternoon to afternoon, you may want to write it out each evening before the next day with your kiddo so that they can see what it looks like to plan the next morning. But again, I'm going to kind of focus in on the idea that it's definitely not enough just to build the system. So just having a clipboard, just having a dry erase marker or dry erase board with a list on it, just having printed visuals isn't magically going to fix anything. That's the structure part of it. We've got visual checklists, maybe with pictures, but the support part of that looks like modeling the language that you hear internally that cues you to go check your own checklists. So it can look like, let's check the board, what's next? And you can do that together. You're not necessarily asking the question and expecting your child to respond. You're asking the question and and you walk over to the checklist together and you point to it and you respond, especially early on in using the structure, and then go execute that part of the activity. And when that part is finished, you say it again, we got to go back to the checkboard and see what's next, or back to the checklist and see what's next. But modeling out loud and doing it with your kiddo for as long as you need to until you feel pretty confident. And maybe one day that looks like all of a sudden they're like, hey, we got to go check the checklist. And they say it before you say it. That's a great cue to suggest that they are ready for you to start fading your level of support. And then over time, we want them checking that checklist independently. So again, the idea of externalizing absolutely everything and not expecting that our kids are going to hold the information that's required to complete a task in their brains, especially in heightened situations. Maybe morning routine is running late today. Maybe little sister was up all night and nobody in the house got any sleep. So it's a high tense, high pressure situation. That's going to be one of those times where we may need to increase the level of support we're providing to use that structure. But again, having the external structure is going to make a world of difference when the routine gets harder or when something unexpected gets in the way. So if the goal is independence, then we want like co-practice at first. We want you using the tools with them, and then near them, and then behind the scenes. So you're showing them what it looks like to rely on the structures that we put in place. Look at that. I pushed the down arrow and right away it changed to the next slide because I had that cue in my head finally. Another strategy that can be pretty effective I feel like I'm going to start saying our learners because I'm still at my office and we call the kids that come here our learners. And I keep kind of looking over at where all their stuff happens, all their routines when they get here. I mean, the kids that we are raising and working with and all those things. But one of the things that we do here at Fit Learning, we have a really clearly well-defined area for where you get ready for a session and where you wrap up your session. And so that's kind of our launch pad area. That's each learner's home for all their stuff while they're here, and the materials that they use during sessions. What that looks like at home is simply the structure of that looks like a hook that's labeled with a backpack, or maybe it has a picture of a backpacker. It's got your kid's name on it and it's right next to the door. So the structure has to be easy to use and it's got to be relevant. It's got to be in the environment where that part of the routine is happening. It doesn't help to have a backpack hook in a child's closet if they have to go through the playroom and the kitchen and past the bathroom on their way to their bedroom where you want their backpack hung up. That's a lot of stuff that can get in the way of not successfully putting the backpack where we want it to be or where we think it should go. We can shape that up over time, but if we want to look at building success early on in learning how to manage and organize your own personal belongings, you're probably going to experience quite a bit more success if the backpack hook is right by the door that they come in when they get off the bus. So that's going to be the easiest place to build success. And then over time, once they have the idea that every time I walk in the front door and I hang my backpack up, then I can go to the kitchen to get a snack, then I can see what my brother's up to in the living room or whatever, then you start to move the hook to where you actually want it, if by the front door is not where you really want it. But that structure, again, has to be salient and meaningful and really in really close proximity to where you want the behavior to happen or when in the routine you want that to happen. And then again, we've got to provide that support so that just by putting a hook somewhere or having the shoe bin by the back door, again, that's not going to be quite enough to get our kids to do these types of routines independently. We need to, again, model the language of what it would sound like for us to be relying on those structures and routine or within the routine. And so more than anything, it feels like thinking out loud. So if you're thinking about the next step in the routine, and you can model that language for your kiddo while you're executing that part of the task, then they're likely to, over time, begin to internalize that language as well. And so it's not necessarily imperative that you use the exact same language every single day, but I would use simple language that sounds pretty similar from one day to the next. And so, and different people who provide the support within these routines are going to use different language anyway. So it's probably a hindrance if we use the exact same language every single time, because then when we can't, we're setting ourselves and our kids up for some amount of failure if the cueing system varies too much. And so then the other part of that also, so for a younger kiddo, we might have a crate or a hook by the door that has their name on it and maybe a picture of the backpack or a picture of the shoes or whatever that you put in the bin. For an older kiddo, that could look like a shelf system in their room that is for school stuff only. Nothing else gets to go there. And maybe it's labeled school stuff, whatever. But again, it needs to be visual. There needs to be some indication that that is the only thing that goes in the school stuff zone or in that launch pad. And so when learners are here at Fit Learning, they've each got a cubby that has their personal work materials in it. Nothing else goes in there ever. And we're in a very, very, very well-controlled environment. We have lots of variables here. You as parents have lots of variables at home that you have to contend with that we don't have to contend with here. So it's really easy to define these launch pads and these systems and structures because everything here is pretty predictable. But every single learner that walks through our doors absolutely knows that the first thing they do when they get here is go right to their cubby, grab their materials, put anything they brought with them in their box, and then go to their workstation. And nothing else ever makes it, that zone is never used for anything else. And that's essentially what we want to have happen in the home environment also. We don't want, as the adults in the world, in our kids' worlds, it gets pretty frustrating to be the constant reminder system. Like you kind of start to feel like things can't get done unless you're the one telling your kids to do the same thing every single day over and over again, right? And so we definitely want to move away from reliance on constant reminders or nagging or saying the same thing every single day and build structures that do that for us. That's the whole gist of what we're honing in on right now. And what that does for our kids is that it encourages ownership so that they can take control of executing these routines and these daily activities in a meaningful way for them. And of course, that also means that we need to think about what's age appropriate for each of our kids and developmentally appropriate for kids, because what one 12-year-old is doing may not be the same thing that's appropriate for another 12-year-old. What a 7-year-old is doing is not going to be the same, or the same thing that a 19-year-old is doing. And so we have to obviously take into consideration all of those very unique individual aspects of the kids that we are raising, but we ultimately want to encourage ownership of these tasks and routines where it makes sense for each of our kiddos. And then in addition to pulling away from being the reminder system, that's fostering a development of time awareness over time so that they can begin to manage and know when to move on to the next step of the routine, or when they are moving too quickly or going too slow and they need to speed up or slow down or whatever needs to be done. They can begin to regulate that because they're no longer reliant on us to be the reminders for them. They've got a system and a structure in place that works effectively for them. The easiest aspect of that to talk about in this regard is timers. And so maybe it's a visual timer that has hashtags on it that say that by the time the red is down to this point, you should be at this point in the routine or whatever, or that's the signal to move on to the next part of the routine. There's apps that can serve as checklists that cue a person to move on to the next step of the routine. So you check this one off, and then the next step moves up in the list of tasks. And that becomes the salient step that they're working on. And then you check that one off, and the next one continues to move up. And some of those can account for the amount of time that you should be engaged in part of that routine, if that's a relevant aspect of what they're completing. And so, the support for that and what fading looks like, I should have added in here, instead of always relying on what's next on your checklist, because that's a reminder as well. That's instead of them relying on you to tell them what to do in the routine, now they're relying on you to tell them to check the checklist. I would phrase this instead of a question as, I would model the language. Next on my list is, and then and make it a statement that they can internalize. So the timer goes off or the task is completed. And they say to themselves, next on my list is X, Y, or Z. And they begin to internalize moving through the steps instead of, again, relying on you to be a reminder to move through the steps. And a great way to do that is to model doing it yourself. So for the first couple days of implementing any type of structure like this, you out loud, as you're getting out of the car, model for them, when I get inside, I'm going to hang my purse by the front door. And then you could say, what are you going? What's the part of the task that you're going to do, or whatever. You can pitch it to a question as a question to them at that point. But I would also model the language that you're using internally to move from one part of the task to the next. Transitions are absolutely a hard part of the day for all of our kiddos, especially when it's from a highly preferred activity to a less preferred activity. And there's always going to be hangups and hiccups when a kiddo's expected to give up the thing they like or want or have thought about all day, and now have to go back into a part of the day that isn't as exciting for them or isn't as meaningful to them. And so when we can help our kiddos anticipate those transition points in the day, we can, over time, we can reduce meltdowns, we can help build emotional regulation. We have a learning coach here at the office who is just exceptional at naming frustration or naming letdown for our learners. So when something doesn't go the way they expect it to, or when they have to move out of downtime and back into work time, she does an awesome job of labeling what she sees them experiencing and labeling it for herself. So she'll say things out loud like, yeah, it was cool to do that with you on break. It's kind of a bummer that we've got to get back to work now. So she'll just put it out there and acknowledge that she feels the same way they do. She's bummed that she doesn't get to just hang out and be on break with them all day. She actually has to get some programming done with them. But it's really cool over time to see each of our learners begin to model and demonstrate that regulation for themselves. It never fails. And we've got learners from 4 years old to 14 right now. And it never fails that eventually during sessions, we start to hear them say things like, I wish I could stay on break longer, or I really don't want to get back to work but I know I can do hard things, or, you know, whatever. They start to kind of pick up her language, but also build it into their own language. And that seeing that emotional regulation, just with that level of support that she's put in is a really cool thing to play witness to. When we want to make transitions visible again, we talked earlier about making everything visible. And so countdown timers are, for a lot of kiddos, can be a highly effective strategy. Letting them set the timer themselves and start the timer so that they have some amount of control over when that time period starts, at least, can be effective. I think for little kids, having a transition song and a countdown is great. I think for older kids, and I'm making some generalizations here, but I think generally as our kiddos grow and mature, we want to be able to fade away from relying on sing-songy strategies. But if it works for your kiddo, that's fine. And if they're great with it, absolutely keep those transition songs in place, whatever it needs to be, maybe with the goal of them singing it internally instead of it having to be something that they're singing out loud every single time a transition comes up. But again, if that's what they need, that's okay. And for little kids, I've absolutely seen where beginning a transition song of some kind triggers the meltdown. That makes it absolutely worse. And so again, none of these strategies apply across the board to any and all of our kids. I'm hoping that you can each leave with at least something to take away and try. And singing songs at transition times may not be it. That is absolutely all right. And giving some time warnings, you know, we have 2 minutes left. Is there anything else you want to do before it's time to move on to whatever's next? I think also planning when they can re-engage in that activity. So if you're thinking about getting through a routine or a task, and you know that at the end of that routine, especially if there's time left over, they can go back to playing whatever it was, or they can go back to that preferred activity. So I think a lot of times kids enter transitions feeling like they're never going to get to re-engage in that preferred activity. If we can help them see in their day or in their schedule where they would have time to re-engage, I think that can be particularly effective as well. So we all know that our kiddos with ADHD are highly capable of completing absolutely amazing things when it's of interest to them. And so one of our tasks is to figure out how to make the lesser preferred parts of the day interesting and meaningful for them, and instill, I don't want to say instill a sense of urgency, but there are parts of the day where a sense of urgency is required and needed. And if we can teach our kiddos that if you can get through these parts of the day quicker and more effectively or efficiently, then you will have more time for the things that are more important to you. Some ways to do that with lots of kiddos are to do beat the clock games or beat me. So race against me. I would not suggest racing against a sibling. I think building that sibling rivalry is probably not the direction that we want to head in. But I'm completely fine for a kid to beat me at executing a routine part of our day here at the office, or racing against the clock. You've got 90 seconds to get your session materials set up or packed up at the end of the day. Let's see if you can beat 90 seconds. And then tomorrow, let's see if you can do it faster than you did today. We don't want to sacrifice quality for speed. And so it's not go as fast as you possibly can. It's, can you be faster than this 90-second clock, or can you be faster than me and still complete the task as well as you did yesterday? Over time, that looks like external motivation transitioning to internal motivation and self-pride in completing tasks independently. And that's going to happen when routines and structures are built at an age appropriate and developmental appropriate level for each of our kiddos. It takes a minute for these slides to change. Oh man, there we go. Okay. This is probably one of my favorite strategies that I landed on while building all of this. If I think about like when I go to buy a car or when I go to get new carpet or paint my house, when I go to put paint on my walls, I would prefer that somebody give me like 5 choices instead of 5,000. I met with immediate decision fatigue when I have more than I want my house to be blue. I don't know what shade of blue I want my house to be, and I don't want 500 shades of blue to pick from. It's maddening to me right away. And I would imagine that for a lot of our kids, lots of decisions throughout the day feel like that, even though they're not quite that big. There aren't quite that many options. I'm sure we've all sat down at a restaurant and looked at a menu and been met with, oh my gosh, this menu is way too big. There are way too many things to pick from. I think a lot of times more choices can result in more shutdown. I think sometimes we feel like maybe we're doing our kids a favor by offering lots and lots of choices in the day, but limiting the number of options within that choice probably sets our kids up for better success over time. One of my favorite strategies that I had seen with a family that I worked with quite some time ago was that they had 5 canvas bucket things or whatever, the cube organizers. And on Sunday, they picked the outfits for every single day of the week that week. Or the night before, they would put 2 outfits in the cube and the kiddo got to get up the next morning and pick between 2 instead of picking between their entire closet. So limiting the options when we give choices helps our kids develop autonomy over what they truly want. And it reduces that decision fatigue that I think hits them pretty frequently in a pretty big way. And so some other ideas for that could look like having a dedicated snack drawer. So you come home from school, you get the after school snack bin, and there's 3 choices of snack to pick from, so that they're not met with an entire refrigerator and pantry full of choices, but there are 3 snack options in there that they are going to be happy with no matter what. It could look like this evening, or maybe right when I get home from school, I'm going to identify the 3 tasks that need to be completed this evening. And then I get to pick which one I start with, which homework assignment I start with. So limiting the options within decision making, I think, can have a pretty profound effect on navigating various parts of the day. And then I've honed in on this a little bit throughout the presentation, but part of building success with these structures is to practice using the structures with them. So it's not enough to put the structures in place and say, okay, go do it, and to expect that independence. We absolutely have to model it. We have to walk through it with them. Again, we may have to increase the level of support that we provide. We may be able to back off on some days, and then over time, we may be able to step away from it entirely. But really modeling how to break a larger task down into smaller mini steps. And especially the routine parts of the day that happen in the same way at the same time nearly every day. Those are great learning opportunities that will carry over to routines as they change or to new routines that come into play later. So again, it looks like doing tasks and routines side by side, and not expecting that the structures are just going to take over and make everything easier all on day one. For a lot of kids, I think it helps a whole lot to name what's happening when their brain isn't doing what we might expect it to be, or it's not performing the way we might expect it to perform in a given routine based on what we've seen previously. And so, that you could have the brain GPS or the brain brakes or the brain boss that are accountable or responsible for planning or impulse control or managing tasks and things like that. Then you have something to talk about when impulse control is taking over, and you can say, yeah, so your brain brakes are not they're not applying right now. You are not slowing down and making thoughtful decisions about what to do next. You're making pretty impulsive decisions What can we do to fine tune your brain brakes right now? Or when a task starts to get messy and cluttered and out of order, the brain boss is not managing that task real well right now. What can we do to tune back into the brain boss to get it back online and things like that? So these are terms and strategies that you can develop with your kiddo over time. I like this because it helps develop a sense of self-awareness and really models for our kids that our brains do the same thing from time to time that their brains do all day long and all day, every day. And so when you can name it for yourself, you can help your kiddo name it for themselves as well. So when you catch yourself not being on top of your game the way that you usually are or that you expect to be, then label what's happening and talk about how to get it kind of back online or back in the direction that can be more successful. They'll internalize that over time. So yeah, you don't teach swimming by tossing a kid in the deep end. It's the same with building these structures and supports where we can't just put them all over the place and expect things to be magical tomorrow morning. It's going to take practice and walking through. And then again, the goal is not to remove the checklist or the visual supports. The goal is to shift who's managing them. So we want to give our kids the ability to manage these structures on their own. Yeah, and don't try everything at once. There is absolutely no need to think that tomorrow morning you're going to have a house that is beautifully labeled and it's got all these salient visual cues. That's going to be pretty stressful and overwhelming to not only you, but to your child as well. And so pick one part of the day and maybe pick an easy part of the day. Maybe start with something easy to build some success. That's exactly what we do here. We don't come in and program for 5th grade when a kiddo's reading at 2nd grade. We program at 2nd grade and we build our way up to 5th grade. Take that same approach at home. Start where you and your child can be successful. And then when you know what structures and supports can be effective, take those and apply them to the next easiest part of the day. And it feels like you might be wasting time to start where you don't need help or support, but that's where you're going to be most successful. If the morning routine is absolute chaos, do not start with the morning routine. You're adding chaos to chaos instead of chaos is not an ideal teaching environment when the world is already tense and emotional and fast, not the best time to be teaching. So if the end of day routine or the transition from school to home is a whole lot easier, start there. Build some of these supports and strategies into that part of the day. Figure out what works when it's easy and take that same strategy and move it to something that's a little bit more challenging. So yeah, that's what I've got at this point. I'm scrolling through.
Thank you very much. There was a comment that someone had to leave and she was looking forward to watching the recording. So that's the only comment. I haven't seen any questions, but if anybody has any, we'd love to hear you.
Okay, awesome. We had, I was just checking with Melissa. She just commented that one thing I have to remind myself is just because one attempt's failed doesn't mean they're all going to fail, right? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. That is absolutely true. Trying something once and deciding that it's a failure isn't really trying. Like you can learn from that failure for sure. There's something to be gained from that, but you got to try it at least a handful of times before you decide that this is not the strategy that's going to be effective or this is not the structure that my kiddo can be successful with. And then again, it also goes back to that level of fading that we want to be able to do over time. your child may be successful with a structure for 3 or 4 or 5 days in a row, and you decide that it's time to start to back off, and you're able to back off pretty significantly. And then all of a sudden one day it's like they don't even know that the structure exists. And that could be a cue that it's time to change the structure because it's become a salient or a saturated part of the environment. It could mean that today was just a really overwhelming day. It was field day at school instead of a regular school day. And I'm hot and I'm tired and I'm disgustingly sweaty. And I'm thinking about nothing else except getting out of the clothes that I'm in. And I completely forgot that my backpack goes right here by the door. So anticipating those kind of pain points or trigger points could be beneficial as well. But yeah, it's definitely, it's a trial and error kind of thing. And one trial is not enough. So yeah, thank you for that.
And Sarah speaking up reminds me that I forgot to introduce her at the beginning of this talk. I am so very sorry. I always forget something. But Sarah Whelan is our new parent group coordinator. So she will be doing the introductions and leading these. She's helping me collect information on the chat groups too. So thank you.
Yeah. Glad to be here. Excited to be involved. I actually was just asking as a parent. I had a question. If I could, everyone hear me? I have my younger daughter's going to middle school next year, and not wanting to get too overwhelmed with all the things. Just trying to figure out how to try to load some things up for her, thinking about some routines ahead of time. I don't know. It's a big question, but if for anyone who's making a transition where their kiddo's going to like maybe another level of school, the beginning of the next school year, if you even have one little tidbit or recommendation you give to families, that would be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those big significant transitions are probably one of my favorite times to work with families through building the structures and supports, because everything is new. And so this just becomes part of the new routine instead of having an established routine and building something into it. When these naturally occurring breaks come up, so maybe a family moves, maybe they are moving from one school to a new school, maybe one parent, their role at work has shifted, and so their work hours change. Those changes or those transitions that are going to impact multiple members of a family are a great natural opportunity to, again, start small with what's one part of this new routine that I can build a structure into, and start to scaffold that support from day one, so that and you can practice leading up to that for sure, but especially on day one of middle school, this is just how we do things because it's middle school, and that comes with a new set of expectations or experiences. It's it's nice to be able to externalize, like, yeah, we're moving to a new house and this is how we do things at the new house. It's not because I said so, it's because this is how we do things at the new house. So it's not because I said so and I have this expectation. It's because you're in middle school now and this is how middle schoolers do things. So hopefully that helps at least a little bit without having super specific information or knowing much about
Right.
who she is.
That's so helpful. Yeah, just trying to, that's great. Because I think the biggest thing is for anyone, obviously me, is getting overwhelmed by all the possibilities. So keeping it small, but thinking it's just a natural opportunity to, is helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and absolutely. Yeah. Permission to start small, permission to not get the entire system right on day one. Like set yourself up for success with that too, because you're not going to get it right on day one. That's okay. That means there's room to think creatively and to really figure out what you and your child need, and not do it just because some person that came on an ADHDKC chat said to. Figure out what works for you and do it in small incremental steps so that nobody is too overwhelmed. I'm super guilty of like, oh yeah, this is a great idea, I'm going to execute it 100% tomorrow. No, I'm not. No matter what it is, I'm not. So helping our kids realize that early can be super beneficial for them too. So any other
questions? This has been very helpful, and I think for some of it, just being able to rewatch it or order it again in my mind, all of these things can be very helpful. My kids are grown and I don't have to do this anymore, but I definitely remember the days that we had the whiteboards and the launching pad. We didn't call it a launch pad, but it was definitely there by the back door. It was one of the most helpful things we ever did.
Yeah, it was fun to put this together and to think about where in my day, personally, as a grown adult, that I don't have kids, so I'm not raising kids, and I definitely am not raising kids with ADHD. But thinking about the different parts of my day that I can set myself up for better success. I mean, it applies to a lot of us, and I think particularly a lot of it applies to kids with ADHD. But yeah, it was kind of a nice reminder on my end too.
Loved weekday bins, the clothing bins. That was the other.
You always hear those famous people who only have one shirt. They just have multiple copies of the same shirt, so they have no decisions to make. They just wear their shirt. School uniforms do that same functions. Take brain energy, and the less you have to do in the morning, the better. Right. We're almost to 7:30. Like, this was perfectly timed, and there is time for one more question if anybody has one. Otherwise, we'll finish on time, and that's amazing.
Yeah, this was fantastic, and thank you so much, Becky.
Well, very good. Thank you. And I will be sending out the recording of it through their Substack. It'll also be on our website. And I will include Becky's contact information if anybody has any questions there as well. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for coming.